Thanks, Tom. Well, look, I am, of course, devastated to be losing two colleagues, both of whom have made an extraordinary contribution in the time that they've been serving in the Australian Senate. But we've also had the addition to the team of some great new faces who bring incredible life experience that I think will really add value to the team. Susan McDonald's got strong roots throughout all of Western Queensland and throughout the north. She's an accomplished businesswoman, and I have no doubt she'll make an excellent mark, particularly in advocating for the needs of rural and regional Queensland. And in Paul Scarr, we have an extremely articulate man, a mining executive who has a really considerable community service record that I think will inform the work that he does. So we've got a really strong team. We've got renewal in the choices that have been made over the weekend. And so we need to say thanks to those who've worked really hard. I know Barry O'Sullivan and Ian McDonald have contributed a great deal over the years. But we can also look to the future and see that we are being well set up for good servants for Queensland.
I want to get into some policy areas. There's a push in Parliament at the moment to lift a ban on territories to be able to legislate on euthanasia. Even if people disagree with this policy, obviously, that you do, why should territories not have the right to be able to make their own laws on this?
Well, the issue of federalism is, as you know, one I feel quite strongly about. And federalism is the principle that the states should be able to, as much as is possible, govern their own affairs, and that the number of things dealt with by the federal government should be fairly limited. But territories are in a slightly different category in that they don't have quite the same infrastructure that some of the states have, and they don't have the population mass to justify, I guess, that additional bureaucracy. What I think is really important here is that we focus on the substance of the policy, and that is the passage of this bill would enable the restoration of the euthanasia policy that was in place in the Northern Territory, and that carries with it some significant risks. Obviously, I'm someone who values quite highly the importance of life itself, and I know there are differing views about this. Many people
I do want to get to that part of the debate in a moment. Can I just ask you,
Sure.
why does a territory not get a right that a state does in that sense? Because the territory did have this right until Kevin Andrews actually intervened in the late 1990s.
Look, territories and states are dealt with differently under the Constitution. If a territory wants to become a state, there's a path for it to do so, and it would have all of the autonomy associated with that. But until that step's been taken, it's not. So if you want to have a debate about whether or not the territory should become states, we can do that.
But even as a territory, they could still have that right, and they did previously have the right to make laws on euthanasia.
Yes, and as a federal government, you've got a range of powers, and you exercise them according to what you think is the primary consideration here. And as I say, federalism is really important, but the right to live is probably more so.
On that question then, because speaking to doctors in this area, you often hear that euthanasia is happening effectively, that people in these situations, they might have a terminal illness, they're given doses that mean the pain goes away, they're in great pain right towards the end of their life, and it hastens their death in the end. That we have this in effect. This would just mean that doctors don't have to get worried, for example, about being prosecuted about it.
Look, I don't think there is a real risk about doctors being prosecuted for the management of serious pain in a palliative care type scenario. I think it would take a pretty heartless person not to feel a lot of empathy for people who are facing that kind of suffering. But there's an enormous difference between easing someone's suffering in that kind of a circumstance, even where the drugs that are used to do so might make the process of dying faster, as compared with a process of actively endorsing suicide for people in particular circumstances, because the active seeking of suicide opens the door for a range of other things. And I'll give you the example of elder abuse. I mean, we already have a problem in our society with elder abuse, and if we create a culture where people who are older start to feel like a burden, start to feel like it's their obligation to leave early because they are a burden on society, then we ask many other uncomfortable questions about, well, what do we do for people who face serious mental illness and whose judgment might be compromised or disabled?
This sounds more like an argument for very careful euthanasia laws that are very limited, for example, Victorian laws.
Look, I think even the safeguards that have been proposed in the model you've described aren't sufficient to guard properly against
What's insufficient
the
about
prospect.
it? What part would you think needs changing?
Take the example of somebody who has had a persistent, painful condition, one that has the potential to, and often does, cause significant depression, a lack of hope, and that can make someone reach the point where they feel like they want to end things, where a medical solution is possible and, if pursued, is often achieved.
What are we talking about? Are you talking about a mental illness there? What are you...
Oh, look, I've had people talk about this in the context of serious back pain, and they've said, you know, I was at a point where I wanted to end my life. But I look back on it now and I see that the degree of my anguish had caused my mental state to be compromised.
And what about the Victorian laws, though, would suggest that someone with back pain could access euthanasia?
Look, anything, I think, that has as the only safeguard the consent of a person who is undergoing the suffering is not enough. I mean, we've got to come back to the basics here. What makes us human and what makes us people is our fundamental rights, and one of them is the right to live. Now, we don't want to make people live in pain. We need to invest in palliative care so that those people who are really suffering at end of life have all they need to be as comfortable as possible. And I acknowledge that more investment is needed to make sure that there aren't people unduly suffering. But,
right, but just on the specific
example, killing people the answer? It's not.
When you talk about someone with back pain, I mean, isn't that more a slippery slope argument rather than something specific? You're not suggesting Victoria's laws as they stand could mean someone with back pain could access euthanasia, are you?
Look, I'm not talking about, you know, the Victorian model. Really what we're talking about, the Territories model here. But we need to be very careful about becoming a society where we start to say it's okay to get rid of the people whose health conditions, whose intensity of need means we're not willing to work on giving them a viable life anymore. And it is a slippery slope argument because if we make it okay in circumstances of, for instance, just palliative care, then we face the next question. You know, if it's okay for us to kill people who are old and have certain illnesses, well, is it also okay to kill middle-aged people who have illnesses? What about young people? Many people suffer terrible illnesses. That doesn't mean we give up on them. No,
but you're not giving up on someone if you're giving them that pain relief at the very end of their life, at the very end of a terminal illness. I mean, this is not because people are old.
There's a big difference between giving someone pain relief that's substantial and that might, you know, if we're being practical about things, have the effect of shortening their lifespan. You know, giving someone pain relief that allows them to live in a degree of more comfort, as opposed to giving someone drugs that actively end their life. There's a very big difference between the two.
Can I ask you quickly, we're nearly out of time, Senator, but what have you made of the push within some in your state for more baseload power on top of the National Energy Guarantee? Is that something that should be looked at?
Well, look, the LNP's convention that was held at the weekend considered energy in a lot of detail. And the response, almost unanimously from the room, was that we really support the way that the proposal for the National Energy Guarantee is going to ensure that energy in Queensland and throughout Australia is more reliable and more affordable, very importantly, more affordable. But there needs to be quality investment in coal and other baseload energies as a part of that mix.
So you'd add your voice to saying we need to do something on top of the National Energy Guarantee. We are nearly out of time, but if I could get your answer quickly on that.
We need to make sure that the National Energy Guarantee provides a fair go for coal as part of a level playing field, absolutely.
And so are you saying yes to add-ons potentially? Should that be looked at?
We need to make sure that the model that's in place is going to give coal a fair go to compete. It's all it asks for, it's all it needs, and that's what the Australian people demand to make sure that we can get reliable and cost-effective energy.
We'll see where the debate goes. Amanda Stoker, thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Tom.